You are wonderful. And may I hand over to Mark for our ending points? Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, well, beginning to Tuesday night meditation class. It's going to be as usual. Just for a few logistics, I guess. Tools on the back, you need them. Anyone need for the first time? Okay. Again, those exercises you need them back and side. Sessions are always free, of course. Any donation for temple. Other than that,
So welcome everyone to our Tuesday evening class. And as I believe that you're all familiar with meditation already, then we will just sit down for about a half an hour of meditation practice before moving on to the wisdom talk today, which is on the topic of contentment. So we start by settling ourselves down into a comfortable position for our meditation. Closing our eyes as gently as possible. Slowing ourselves down by breathing deeply to ourselves. And taking a few moments to check down through the whole of our body, while relaxing each and every muscle as we go. All the way from the top of our head, right the way down to the tips of our toes. And relaxing all the tensions of the muscles in between. The ideal posture for our meditation is a position of poise, where the whole of our body is fairly upright, while remaining comfortable, almost as if there were a thread running from the top of our head all the way down through our back. Almost as if we were suspended from that thread, with our body leaning slightly forwards and upwards. And that sense of arching our back will allow us to breathe easily, while also making it easier for us to find the center of our body. And inside our mind, we reconnect with the best of our meditation, not with particular experiences that we've had in the past, but with what we can remember of the feeling that accompanied the best of our meditation in the past. Perhaps a sense of joy or well-being as far as we can remember it. And if we conjure up that same feeling inside us all over again, and the same quality of mind will also return to us. The same quality of mind that we enjoyed the last time round, almost as if we were updating it to the present day. And somehow it will help us to return to that same place in our meditation again, with a sense of lightness, a sense of the whole body being filled with happiness and joy. And we can imagine that inside our body is just an empty space, a hollow cavity, without any organs or tissues, muscles or bones. Or alternatively, as if our whole body is like a bubble, with nothing on the inside, but with a completely transparent skin. Or for those of you who've been meditating longer, it may be as if your whole body has disappeared altogether, almost like inhabiting a space that truly belongs to us. But whatever our experience of that inner space, we allow the focus of our attention to make its way gradually down to the center of our body. At a place somewhere around our solar plexus, or somewhere around the area of our diaphragm. And it shouldn't just be a place that we are searching for in our mind's eye, but almost as if our whole awareness has relocated down to that central point. As if our head had disappeared completely, and all our faculties, whether it be perception, memory, thought or cognition, have come together at a single place at the center of ourselves. So our awareness is actually located down at our center, in the same place as our meditation object, whatever that may be, whether it's something we visualize or something that we feel. So rather than looking down on the meditation object from somewhere above, it's as if we are there with the object itself. For some of you already acquainted with the observation technique, it's simply a question of seeing what's already there and following that without interfering, simply by being attentive at the center. For those of you who are better versed in visualizing some sort of meditational object, it may be a visual object like that of the shining sun, or it might be a tactile object such as an imaginary invisible fruit, which you can feel at the center, at the turning point of the breath, on the same level as the diaphragm. Whatever our approach to keeping the mind on track at the center, we do so continuously with a feather-light touch, an unbroken and exceedingly gentle attention, bringing our awareness back if it happens to swivel away to any other distractions around us, or just following it if there is some sort of transformation in the mind. If our thoughts are few and far between, we do our best to ignore them. Certainly not letting a first thought proliferate into a second or a third. And only as a last resort making use of the mantra, Samma Arahang, if the thoughts are really too many to deal with. So we cultivate our attention in this way, lightly and gently. Each to our own practice now for a few more moments in silence until we come to the appropriate time. We continue to keep our mind on track at the center of the body as continuously as we can, for as long as we can. If our mind wanders away onto anything else around us, each time we realize, we just bring our attention back again to the center as before. If the inner object disappears, we can conjure up a new one. If it changes, we just follow it in its new form, observing the way the inner experience evolves in the mind. If thoughts return, we do our best to ignore them. But if the thoughts are too many simply to ignore, we might make use of that traditional mantra, hearing the sound of the words Samma Arahang coming up from the center of the body. In the meantime, we continue to maintain our awareness at the center of the body with the very lightest of touch. A feather-light touch at the center, letting our mind settle into silence until there's nothing but the inner experience for us to follow at the center. We continue in this way for a few more moments in silence until we come to time for some loving-kindness meditation. continue to keep our mind on track at the center of the body the whole of the time, lightly, gently and continuously, always at the center of whatever inner experience we've built up for ourselves as a result of the meditation so far this session. For some people, the inner experience will amount to a sense of brightness at the center of oneself. For others, it may be more of a feeling, something like a sense of well-being, again centered at the seventh base of the mind. For others still, it may be images, large or small, centered around the middle of the body. Sometimes they may be small, like objects. Sometimes much larger images, like whole vistas or panoramas, where we are actually smaller than the images we see. Whatever inner experience we have, we touch our mind gently at the center, so gently that it's almost as if we are hardly touching at all, touching with the lightness of a warm fingertip in contact with the surface of some new fallen snow, touching the snow so gently that there'll be a melting away at the point of contact, where solid becomes liquid and liquid becomes vapor, spreading outwards, rarefying, spreading like the ripples across the surface of a pond, ever wider from the point of contact. In this way, we extend our inner experience, initially to the whole of ourselves, filling ourselves with the light or that sense of well-being, or expanding the inner picture to fill the whole of our body by a process known as the spreading of loving kindness. We make the affirmation at the center of ourselves that, may I be well and happy, free from all suffering. And then we extend the same loving kindness beyond the boundaries of our own body, outwards into the room around us, extending outwards in all directions like an halo or an aura, to encapsulate all the sentient beings around us in the room where we're sitting for meditation. We start to return some of the benefits of meditation to the world around us by making the affirmation at the center of ourselves that, may all living beings here in the room be well and happy, free from suffering, and live together in peace and harmony. We spread the loving kindness further outwards now to the whole building, wider to the whole neighborhood, outwards to the whole borough, the whole county, almost as if we were extending our loving kindness across a map seen in bird's eye view, in ever widening circles around us, taking in all the sentient beings in this area, with the wish that may all these living beings be well and happy, live in peace and harmony. Let's especially at this time when so many are feeling isolated or afflicted by uncertainty. We extend our loving kindness as a torrent of peace, a tide of solace, extending outwards to bring happiness wherever there is suffering, increasing the happiness where happiness is scarce. We extend loving kindness outwards to all the home counties, across the whole of Great Britain, the British Isles, the whole continent of Europe, with the wish that all living beings here on this continent be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. We extend our loving kindness across the face of the globe, to all the continents of the world, as if we're extending loving kindness across the entire face of this planet, with the affirmation at the center of ourselves that may all living beings, whether on the land, in the air, or in the sea, be touched by our loving kindness, that these living beings be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony, that world peace might become a reality within our own lifetimes. We can extend loving kindness in all the 6 great directions, almost as if we were extending a beam of loving kindness outwards into the universe around us, to the front and to the back, without limits, to the right and to the left without boundaries, above and below without end. Extending loving kindness to all living beings in the universe, so that no living being without exception is left untouched by our loving kindness. Again, with the same wish for all living beings to be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. And for the last few moments of our practice, we can extend loving kindness towards particular loved ones who we may be thinking about, holding them close within the brightness or our sense of well-being at the center of ourselves, thinking of their name or their face, extending loving kindness to them in particular, especially if we are separated from them by huge distances, and extending loving kindness for those to whom we feel a particular debt of gratitude, towards those still living, or even those who have already passed, trusting that the pure intention of our loving kindness can extend across the huge gulfs of space and time to reach those loved ones wherever they are to be found. We extend our loving kindness in this way for the last few moments of our practice together until we come to the appropriate time. Sabbhe buddha palapata paccekanan palang arahantananjate jena arakam bandami sappaso sappaputtanupavena sappadhammanupavena sappasanghanupavena satasoti bhavantu te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for this evening, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So far, so good, everyone. Hopefully not frozen to the spot. Have your mind frozen to your center is good enough. Well, today I continue with the second part of a talk on contentment, which I started a couple of Thursdays ago, at which time I mentioned that although contentment is not much encouraged in our cutthroat business world, from the point of view of those with a spiritual practice, it is quite important because many of the more subtle qualities of mind that we are reaching towards, especially in learning meditation, are ones where you have to let them sort of grow on their own and have the space to do that. And if you're constantly sort of interfering and cajoling those qualities to come to the fore, then often you ruin the work which you've already done. So sometimes you have to be happy with things, even if they're not perfect, in order to give them the space to sort of become perfect in their own time. It's an ironic quality, but one which is part of the stairway of 38 blessings which we've been looking at, and today we come to number 24. Last time I talked a little bit about what we mean by content and discontent, and today we get a little bit more practical as to some of the ways in which contentment can actually be cultivated, with advice coming from more secular sources and also from Buddhist sources as well. But we'll look at some of those more secular ways of looking at how we can cultivate contentment. And basically we have to accept that contentment is not something that comes easily. It's something that needs to be worked on because we are fairly restless by nature. If we enjoy something, then we tend not to enjoy it for very long. Even if it seemed great at the time, it doesn't take very long at all before we are waiting for the next enjoyable thing to come along, which would be different from the last one. So this explains why, for example, having lots of money doesn't necessarily make us more contented. And if we are a shopaholic, then we might get a rush when we splurge on an impulse buy, but then that feeling soon wears off again, dropping us right back where we started. So it's not the automatic byproduct of more money or more success. It's more to do with what lies behind that feeling. And it helps to point us in the direction of how, if we are more contented, we can derive pleasure from simple things, like maybe a walk with a loved one, or a meaningful conversation, or a cup of coffee, or maybe just a breath of fresh air. So when we start to be able to appreciate small things in life and take pleasure in simplicity, it's an indication that we are on the way towards mastering a more authentic sort of emotion of contentment inside us. And we may find that owning more than we need actually makes us more restless. And we find that financial stability is maybe something which is useful, but there's more to contentment than just having a secure financial future. So even a person who's not very rich or successful, a person who is rich already and maybe successful already may still find it hard to be satisfied with life, because there's always something more if they're not careful. So 7 suggestions for how we can be more content with what we have. Firstly, to perhaps explore the triggers which set you off towards feelings of discontent in your life. So if you're unhappy or depressed, then maybe you need to start by observing yourself to find out what might be causing those feelings. Because once you identify the impulses that trigger you, then you might be able to select more productive things to focus on that do bring more of a sense of contentment. Second thing is to align your goals and actions with your values, because it's said that if you don't believe in anything, like greater than yourself, for example, then you are unlikely to be satisfied no matter how knowledgeable or wealthy you become. Because we tend to be defined by our values, then if we have none of those sorts of things to draw on, then there's nothing to pull us out of that sense of restlessness or despair, which leads us to sort of lash out on impulses to which we think are going to cure our lack of contentment. Third way is to look for feelings of belonging. For some people, that might refer to things like family or things you take pride in. It might be being part of a like-minded community. If you realize that all the people you seem to be with don't seem to be like your people, then it might be better to connect instead with a place where you do feel that you truly belong, where you don't have to prove anything to all those other people the whole of the time, and where that community appreciates your worth and will help you to discover your strengths. Once you feel more productive, then your sense of fulfillment in what you do will come more naturally. That's the idea for overcoming lack of contentment. Another thing you may need to do is to let go of your past. There's one lady I met who was a disciple of a Tibetan teacher, and she'd been in a very luxurious lifestyle for many years, which depended on the fact that her husband was quite wealthy. And then the husband suddenly passed away, and he hadn't told her all the secret passwords for his bank accounts. And for a few years, this lady really was out of her mind. And then she realized that she needed to be more content and just accept and sort of move on from her past and accept that her life had changed permanently. So she became much more spiritual after that and became a follower of a Tibetan teacher. So letting go of your past may be something which can help you to deal with contentment more gracefully. Fifth thing, which we'll look at more next time. Next week I'll spend a lot more time looking at gratitude generally. But being more grateful is one way to feed a sense of contentment. Because if we're not grateful for things or people around us, then we fail generally to be very contented with them. So you need to appreciate what you have, to have a sense of gratitude, to see the value of things. The sixth thing is to avoid comparing yourself with others, which can be a sign of the times a little bit, especially with the people who spend more time on social media than they do dealing with people in person. If we're always comparing ourselves unfavorably with others, then we are unlikely to be content with ourselves. There's only really one comparison that's worth making, which is to compare yourself with how you were yesterday. So compare yourself with yourself. And if there's an improvement on how you are today with how you were yesterday, then you should be proud of yourself. Yeah? Comparing yourself with another person who's brings a completely different set of skills and history to the table is like comparing apples and oranges. So the comparison which matters is comparing yourself with how you were. And the last thing is to think positive, which may sound a little bit like glib, but if you are constantly expecting life to be a bed of roses, and then you can prepare yourself for constant disappointment, yeah, and discontentment as well. But if you know that life is of the nature to be imperfect, then you can be content with the little things which work out for you. I was once posted in a market town in Belgium, and they sent the Jehovah's Witnesses round to sort of preach to the heathen sort of thing. And they prepared their question very carefully because they thought it was bound to be the question which I was going to ask, which was all about suffering, because they heard like Buddhists are very hot on suffering. So their question was, and I said, I'll give you 15 minutes to make your case. Aren't you surprised that God leaves people to suffer in the world? And I said, no, don't think I'm surprised at all. I think suffering is like part of life. And then it's sort of, oh, I didn't know how to follow up on that question then. They expected me to sort of blame God or something, that there's all this suffering around. But no, that is what life is like. But what we can do is work with that. And part of it is to help us insulate ourselves, is to have the sense of contentment where little glimmers of hope come through. We can learn to appreciate those more. So it's not that it's going to be difficult to let go of some of the habits that get in the way of our sense of contentment. But even if you don't already have a spiritual practice, there's a lot you can do to become more satisfied with what little you may already have in life. If you're turning more to a more sort of Buddhist take on happiness and contentment, then it boils down to an explanation in which you find in Buddhism of there being two sorts of happiness. The first of which is something that depends on external stimuli, and the second of which comes from inside you. So the name for happiness that comes from external sources is samisa sukha, whereas the happiness that comes from inside, which doesn't need something external to stimulate it, is niramisa sukha. The things which we rely upon, which are a rather tenuous connection to contentment in life, would be the pleasures that come to us via our senses, eyes, ears, nose, taste buds, and sense of touch, which are always changeable, unreliable. Even if you daydream, then even daydreams don't last. But the sort of happiness which is much more reliable is the happiness which you carry around with you, which you can then apply to whatever comes to you via your senses. And the trouble with lack of contentment is that it tends to match up with those two different sorts of happiness. if you are able to be a person who can find contentment no matter what your circumstances, then you are in a much stronger position when the going gets tough. There is a saying in the Buddhist scriptures that if you can be content with what you have and what you receive, then you tend to be a happier person. So if you're happy with what comes to you or where you're at, then you tend to be happier as a result. And just as there are two different sorts of happiness, then you can talk about there being two different sorts of poverty, because poverty and contentment are often sort of connected. Interested to hear about it? In our cost of living crisis. Well, there are two sorts of paupers, apparently, in the world. There are material paupers, and then there are spiritual paupers. Have you categorized yourself yet? Well, those who are materially poor are actually the lucky ones. Goes against the grain a little bit. Why? Well, materially poor people are those who lack the wherewithal to keep themselves afloat. But they are said to be luckier because at least they are only temporarily poor. Because as soon as they can find a way to earn a living, then they'll be able to get back on their feet again. But there are those who are spiritually poor, who are much more unfortunate, and they are poor because they spend more than they earn. It doesn't matter how much they earn, but if they spend more than they have, then they become a spiritually poor person because they lack moderation in their spending. And such people, no matter how much they earn, even if you increase it, then they're always going to overspend. Then they will end up as being permanently poor. So no matter how much you come up with to help them, it doesn't actually help to get them out of that hole which they have dug for themselves. So it may include even the mega rich of the world who already have a net worth of tens of billions, who have asked whether they'd like to double or triple that estimate of themselves. They would always say yes, because there's always someone richer than them who they want to compete with. So if it comes down to Buddhists, then the message would be that contentment for a person who never knows enough would be to do with learning about moderation, learning to say when enough is enough, and it'll stop people from competing for extravagance or being pretentious or even going to war over things which they want yet more of the same thing. And this is why the Buddha said that if you are a contented person, then that is the ultimate wealth. And in this connection, I have a little bit of a story, which is a story our teacher in Thailand liked to tell about a certain Minister of Commerce in Thailand. He came from a wealthy family, but he shared two events that happened to him on the same day, which highlighted the importance of the right sort of contentment. So one day he left his home early in the morning and he was walking to work. And as he was walking to work, then he passed a beggar on the street. And in his family there was a tradition that if they would never turn away a request for help. So how much they might help that person depended, but they would never refuse another person downright. So he'd normally not think twice about giving a person some loose change from his pocket. But that day when he looked in his pocket, there wasn't any loose change. All he had was banknotes. So he had to open up his wallet, and he gave a $5 to the beggar. And the beggar was so happy that he bowed down on the pavement at the feet of the minister. And he exclaimed out loud that he'd been begging since childhood, but today was the first time he'd ever met someone generous enough to give him a whole $5 in his little cup or whatever. And his eyes shone with appreciation, and the delight of the beggar sort of cheered up the minister in a way that sort of made a great start to his day. So he walked a little bit further down the road and came to his ministry, where the first person he met inside his offices was a bank manager with a very pained expression on his face. And the minister asked whether the banker was maybe not feeling so well. And the banker confessed, "I'm so upset, I haven't slept all week. I told my son earlier in the year to order a product which was bound to become scarce from the market. But my son didn't believe me at first, so he delayed the order. And only the first order ended up being ahead of the competition. For the second and third lots, then we lost our market share. So my son should have had a profit of 100 million this year, but because he hesitated, he only managed a profit of 60 million. So we lost 40 million, which we could have had." So the minister expressed his condolences, and then he went into his office, but that day he could hardly get any work done, because he was busy musing about the ways of the world, a beggar who is happy all day with a $5, or a bank manager who cannot sleep because he only got a profit of 60 million. So he sat and wondered if any of his policies, as like Minister of Commerce, were actually going to make any changes at all in society, and whether actually anyone would be happier as a result of all his work or not. So often it comes down in contentment to spending beyond one's means as being the main thing to focus on when we are trying to define a sense of contentment for ourselves. And it comes down to some very simple arithmetic, which you might recognize from Mr. Micawber of David Copperfield fame, where to cut out the shillings and sixpence and so on. If your income is 20 quid and your expenditure is £19.99, then your life will be happiness. But if your income is 20 quid and your expenditure is £20 and a penny, then the result will be misery. If you upgrade that to more modern times, Paul Clitheroe is apparently a financial analyst. He said that there are plenty of ways to get ahead in life, but the first is so basic that he's embarrassed to say it, which is just make sure you spend less than you earn. And the Buddhist touchstone in this is often described as the four chambers of the millionaire's heart, which is basically working hard for a living. We've seen this already back in blessing number 15. But at the same time, remembering that working hard for a living is not it's the means, not the end in life. Yeah? The second thing is what you do manage to earn for yourself, taking good care of that, investing it wisely, I suppose. associating with the sorts of friends who are not extravagant or wasteful, and lastly, not spending beyond your means. Doesn't mean that you have to live like a monk, but if you have something that you really want, what do you do? Buy it on Never Never? You save up for it. Yes, this is what they do. And having looked at all these sort of secular ways, advice on contentment of various sorts, there are some particularly Buddhist pieces of advice on this. First of which is what are known as daily reflections to try to put life a little bit more in perspective. For those of you familiar with what's known as the evening chanting, there is a particular phrase that's often actually chanted in one's own language and not in the scriptural language, which goes, "We are of a nature to age, we have not gone beyond aging. We are of a nature to sicken, we have not gone beyond sickening. We are of a nature to die, we have not gone beyond dying." To remind ourselves that we're not going to be here forever. There's another little phrase that comes from Thailand. If you speak to a businessman, you'll live forever, but if you speak to a monk, you die 100 times each day. Rough translation. Why? Because businessmen have always got like 100 more possible projects, which are, if you only did this, then it would come out as a great profit and, be able to make a really great living out of it. Even if you lived 100 times over, there wouldn't be enough time to do all the things which are great ideas for a businessman. But if you speak to a monk, all they say is, never forget, life is transient. You never can know if you're going to wake up tomorrow morning. So it's a little bit of a different view of life, but the idea of that is to put things in perspective about what is really important in your life. Is it amassing huge wealth which you can't take with you anyway, or not? Is there something more to your sense of meaning in life than that? Second thing is to learn about moderation from simple things like knowing how much to eat or consume, for very simple things that ought to be easy to work out, like how do you know when you are full of food? Stop eating 4 mouthfuls before you feel full. Yeah. So that the 4 mouthfuls on the way down your throat just top you up nicely, rather than keep on eating until you're already full and then have a little bit more just in case. Yes. Third piece of advice is to learn about contentment, or learn about the sense of fulfillment that comes from inside when you're able to give to other people rather than just getting the whole of the time. Because once you start to recognize that feeling of serving other people, then you start to cotton on to what this idea of happiness derived from things that are not external actually feels like. It's often like these parents who take spoiled kids down to give a donation at maybe an orphan home. If they have such things anymore, group homes they probably have nowadays. So that their children, instead of complaining about never having enough or whatever, can realize that there's always someone worse off than themselves. So they can appreciate what they do have. Fourth piece of advice, maybe try out keeping what's known as 8 precepts, which often we do on the retreats that we organize, where, for example, you don't get an evening meal, so you learn to get by on 2 meals a day, and it makes you probably think quite a lot about your normal attitude to food, which is have a meal every time you walk past the fridge or whatever. Also, not wearing jewelry or makeup on the retreat makes you realize what it's like to be content with yourself as you are, instead of obsessing about appearances. And not sleeping on a luxury bed or sleeping as long as you'd like, not to be over attached to comfort. And meditating every day is helpful in order to cultivate a sense of contentment in life. Sometimes if you start to realize the way your mind works more in depth, more close up, then you realize that nourishing the soul, as it were, is a way to have that sense of inner peace that doesn't constantly hunger after something else to make it perfect. Last but not least, something which you can do from time to time is to spend time living a monastic life. It's possible to do that without making a career out of it. But for many young men in places like Thailand, often they spend 3 months as a monk for the experience. And although they may come out of that and continue their studies or go to earn their living in some other way, but the experience of living with no more than three robes and a bowl and being content with that gives a good perspective on any other things which come to them in life as being so much more and something to be appreciated on top of what is the bare necessity for getting by in life. But I have one quick story to finish off with today, which is a sort of golden goose story. Golden goose? The one you've heard about probably laid golden eggs. Well, this one has the golden feathers, okay? And it comes from a story, not from the Brothers Grimm, but from a much older one. And the beginning of the story was about actually a Buddhist nun who lacked contentment. And what she wanted more of was more garlic. She loved garlic, and she couldn't get enough of it. And one day she was very glad to meet up with someone who farmed garlic for a living. And he had a whole field full of garlic. And the farmer assumed that the nun would know moderation, like being a monastic and all that. He ought to know all about moderation. So he just pointed out the garlic field and said, if ever you want some garlic, then just tell the field caretaker and you can help yourself. Tell him that you have my permission to take what you like. So the nun started out with a few cloves of garlic, and then she couldn't help herself, and she just gathered more and more until she had picked cartloads of garlic. I don't know what you can do with all that garlic, but she seemed to want that much. And her greed didn't go unnoticed by the neighbors, who started to gossip and spread it about that the nun was shameless. And the farmer himself didn't know what to do because he basically said that she could do that. And the news eventually got through to the Buddha, and the Buddha, in response to the situation, made a very simple rule that from now on, nuns may no longer eat garlic. So Buddhist nuns now, even down to the present day, are not allowed to have garlic. Monks can, but nuns can't, yes. But that's not the end of the story. The Buddha looked back into a past life of this particular nun, whose name was Thulananda. And it turned out that in a previous lifetime, she had been a female Brahmin with a husband and a daughter. And the husband died rather early in life, prematurely. And because he had done a mixture of good and bad things in his life, the bad parts meant that he got born as a goose, but the good bits meant that he got to be a goose with golden feathers. And he was still worried about the welfare of his family. So he flew back to where his family were living, and the idea was that he would drop a few golden feathers each week or whatever for his family so that they could get by. However, his wife was the same character who liked the garlic in the lifetime later, and she could never get enough of a good thing. So after having the convenience of a few feathers from the golden goose every week, she got a little bit more greedy, and she just plucked the whole goose bare of golden feathers and went off to buy garlic or whatever with the feathers, probably not garlic, but whatever she wished for. And after that, she locked up the husband goose in an enclosure somewhere. And when eventually his feathers grew back again, they were conventional feathers. They were no longer the golden ones anymore. And knowing that he could do nothing more to help his family, then the moment he had his feathers back, then he flew away and didn't look back again. So the moral of the story is that if you recognize you're onto a good thing, then you should allow contentment to teach you to enjoy it in a sustainable way. And then you can go back many times in the future, whether it be garlic or golden feathers. For today, I'd like to encourage you to keep meditating. If you don't already do so, don't just meditate when you come to the center, but try to meditate a little at home as well. And a good way to build up the habit in your daily life would be to meditate for, let's say, 20 minutes a day. And if you can establish 20 minutes daily, then you can gradually build on that. Some people like to meditate in the morning, some people like to meditate last thing at night, but being able to meditate in that way will gradually build up a sense of progress in your meditation practice, allowing you to go further and faster in your meditation. If you're a little hazy about the meditation technique, then you can get a lot of audio tracks leading meditation for free from the MindGem app, which you can download for free onto your mobile phone, and a selection of teachers from our tradition leading meditation on there. Lately, there's also even an audio book about the history of our meditation tradition as well. Classes here continue every Tuesday and Thursday evening, and they go right up to Christmas, so the 20th and the 22nd will be the last dates for this year, and then it will pick up again on the 10th of January. Online via Zoom, there's also a Saturday meditation, which you can meditate along to at home between 7 and 8 p.m. British time, with meditators from around Europe, and I believe that goes on until about the 19th of December. And what are we doing over New Year? Well, we are having a little bit of a New Year retreat between the 30th of December and the 2nd of January, which you are welcome to come and join in with if you have free time, or you can drop in on days that you are free or sessions when you are free, because there will be a few people staying over who wish to have teachings in English, a group of about 5 or 6, so it'll be fairly informal, I think, but if you want to join in with that, then you are welcome to do that, and maybe inform Patrick of when you are likely to be able to come. And in the new year, we have a special roadshow visiting us between the 17th and the 24th of January. Just learned about this yesterday, where they have a couple of American monks will come over to give some special sessions during that week of the 17th to 24th of January from the I Monastery, which is probably short for International Monastery. It's one of the monasteries in a branch of ours up north in Thailand, where a lot of the English-speaking monks have made their home, but they are branching out and coming to share their knowledge with us. Venerable Nick and Venerable Michael, both American. So that's all I have for you today, but if you have any comments, feedback, or questions at this point, I'd be very pleased to hear from you. So may you all enjoy happiness, success, prosperity in life, and discover contentment with whatever the festive season throws at you this year round, now and forevermore.